The late afternoon sun filtered through the soaring glass atrium of the Aurelia International Gemological Auction House, projecting sharp, geometric prisms of light onto the polished white marble floor. Surrounding the grand rotunda were velvet-lined mahogany display pedestals, each housing rare emeralds, Burmese rubies, and flawless diamonds worth tens of millions of dollars. Standing in the center of the atrium, holding a microfiber cloth and an industrial spray bottle, was Malachi Cross. To the high society collectors, aristocratic buyers, and polished appraisers milling through the gallery, Malachi was completely invisible. He was a tall, broad-shouldered black man in his early 50s, wearing a dark grey maintenance jumpsuit with a brass name tag that read M. Cross, Environmental Services. He pushed his supply cart with practiced, deliberate calm, wiping away fingerprints from the heavy bulletproof display cases. His posture was slouched just enough to look harmless, his gaze seemingly fixed on the smudges on the glass. But behind his calm, dark eyes lay a mind trained to measure light wavelengths at a microscopic level. For over 25 years, Malachi Cross had been the Chief Director of National Gemological Security and the lead forensic evaluator for Federal Reserve vaults. He was widely recognized in elite covert circles as the possessor of the Diamond Eye Rare, innate visual acuity that allowed him to instantly detect synthetic molecular structures, laser-drilled fractures, and refractive anomalies without the aid of a microscope. He had designed the vault security systems for 3 central banks and exposed multi-million-dollar international forgery rings. 14 months ago, following a quiet retirement from federal service, Malachi chose a life of peaceful obscurity. He took an entry-level cleaning contract at Aurelia, the city's premier gemological house, for one single reason: to be near his daughter, Sienna. Malachi paused near a display pedestal, his dark eyes subtly drifting toward the glass-walled appraisal laboratory on the second-floor mezzanine. Inside the sterile, pristine laboratory sat 22-year-old Sienna Cross. Sienna wore a crisp white lab coat over a modest navy dress. Her dark hair was neatly pinned back, her eyes focused intently through a binocular loupe as she examined a rough-cut sapphire. She moved with meticulous grace, checking the specific gravity, recording thermal conductivity, and logging spectral lines into her tablet. A gentle, proud warmth flickered in Malachi's eyes. Sienna was his greatest accomplishment. After his wife passed away, Malachi had raised Sienna with quiet devotion. Respecting her desire to forge her own path in the gemological world, he had never pulled strings or revealed his high-level credentials to her employers. Sienna had earned her junior gemologist position at Aurelia purely on her merit, graduating at the top of her university class. Down on the main floor, the heavy glass doors of the executive suite clicked open. Stepping out onto the marble balcony overlooking the atrium was Julian Vance, Aurelia's night operations director. Julian was a 38-year-old man in a bespoke 3-piece silk suit, his hair gelled back with obsessive precision, an expensive diamond signet ring gleaming on his right pinky finger. Born into wealth, Julian viewed the auction house as his personal kingdom and treated every hourly worker with open condescension. Julian held a leather-bound catalogue in one hand and a diamond tester pen in the other. His sharp, arrogant eyes scanned the floor, instantly locking onto Sienna in the second-floor lab. Cross. Julian's sharp, reedy voice echoed across the quiet mezzanine, causing a pair of visiting art critics to glance over in mild disapproval. Sienna immediately set her lap down, standing at attention through the glass wall. "Yes, Mr. Vance?" Julian strutted into the lab, his leather loafers clicking loudly on the hardwood floor. He snatched the sapphire off her velvet tray, holding it up to the light with a dismissive sneer. Why hasn't the preliminary appraisal report for the Imperial Collection been uploaded to the private client network yet? Julian demanded, his tone sharp and grating. The private bidding preview starts in less than 3 hours. I finished the density calculations 10 minutes ago, Mr. Vance. Sienna explained politely, keeping her voice calm and professional. However, the clarity index on the 12-carat sapphire requires a secondary refraction test. The internal inclusions suggest it may have undergone unrecorded heat treatment, which would alter its valuation by 20%. Julian stepped closer, leaning over her desk with an overbearing, intimidating posture. I didn't hire you to write research dissertations, Cross. You're a junior appraiser. Your job is to verify weight, sign the preliminary certificate, and clear the stones for auction. If you can't keep up with the pace of a premier house, I can easily replace you with 50 other graduates who won't ask questions. Down on the main floor, Malachi's hand tightened slightly around his microfiber cloth. His broad shoulders squared, his dark eyes locking onto Julian through the glass wall with an icy, unshakable focus. He did not yell, nor did he make a scene. He simply set his spray bottle onto his cart and began walking toward the mezzanine stairs. Inside the lab, Sienna kept her chin held high, meeting Julian's glare with quiet dignity. Accuracy is the foundation of Aurelia's reputation, Mr. Vance. My word is the foundation of this house, Julian snapped, tossing the sapphire back onto her felt pad with careless disrespect, causing the delicate stone to bounce against her digital scale. Get the report signed in 5 minutes, or don't bother coming in tomorrow. Julian turned on his heel to exit the lab, only to find his path completely blocked by a massive wall of dark grey jumpsuit cloth at the doorway. Malachi stood frame-wide at the threshold, holding a small insulated lunch bag in his closed hand. His posture was completely relaxed, but his broad, 6'2" frame carried a quiet, immovable weight that made Julian involuntarily halt in his tracks. "What do you want, old man?" Julian sneered, looking up at Malachi with disgust. "Can't you see this is a restricted laboratory?" Malachi's deep voice was a smooth, calm baritone that carried no anger, only an absolute, unshakable weight. "The stone has a microscopic feather fracture along the pavilion girdle, Mr. Vance," Malachi said softly, looking down into Julian's eyes. "My daughter is correct. If you put a high-heat lamp over that sapphire during the auction preview without noting the treatment, the stone will split under stress." Julian blinked, momentarily taken aback by the janitor's precise terminology, before his face flushed with elitist fury. "Did a floor cleaner just try to lecture me on gemology?" Julian Vance stood in the doorway of the appraisal laboratory, his jaw slackened in a blend of utter disbelief and mounting fury. His manicured hands clenched into tight fists at his sides as he glared up at the broad, weathered face of the man standing before him. "Excuse me?" Julian scoffed, his reedy voice rising an octave as he gestured wildly with his leather-bound catalogue. "Did a janitor, a guy who pushes a mop for $15 an hour, just attempt to explain pavilion girdles and thermal fracture mechanics to me?" Malachi Cross did not flinch. He remained perfectly still, his posture grounded and calm, his dark eyes meeting Julian's frantic glare with a cool, unreadable composure. "I am stating a physical fact, Mr. Vance," Malachi replied smoothly, his deep baritone as steady as iron. "The stone's crystalline lattice is unstable under focused tungsten halogen lighting. My daughter's caution is protecting this house from a high-profile liability during the bidding preview." Aria Sienna stepped forward immediately, taking the small insulated lunch bag from her father's hand while gently resting her hand on his forearm. She knew her father's quiet strength, but she also knew how dangerous a petty, status-obsessed man like Julian could be when his ego was bruised. "It's fine, Dad," Sienna said softly, her voice crisp and composed. "I'll run the secondary spectral sweep right now." Julian let out a bitter, barking laugh, stepping sideways to address two senior appraisers who had paused near the mezzanine railing to watch the commotion. "Look at this," Julian mocked, shaking his head with open disdain. "A floor cleaner coming up to the executive suite to give gemological advice. Tell me, old man, did you pick up those big technical words while wiping fingerprints off the display cases? Or do you just like pretending you're something more than a glorified handyman in a faded jumpsuit?" Julian leaned in closer, poking a manicured finger aggressively toward the brass badge on Malachi's chest. "You and your daughter are here because I tolerate your presence," Julian hissed under his breath, his voice laced with venom. "She's a fresh graduate working off an entry-level contract, and you're an aging laborer who couldn't tell a cubic zirconia from a D4-less diamond if it bit you on the nose. You don't step into my lab, and you never correct my appraisal timelines." Malachi looked down at the finger-hovering inches from his chest. To an average man, such public degradation would incite anger. But Malachi had spent a quarter-century examining the world's most deceptive counterfeits, dealing with high-level covert operatives, and assessing covert vault breaches. Julian Vance's juvenile insults carried zero weight against a man who had secured state treasuries. Instead, Malachi's trained eye automatically registered three microscopic details about Julian in a fraction of a second: the faint, irregular tremor in his right index finger, the subtle discoloration along the seam of his bespoke Italian suit jacket indicating a recent rushed alteration to hide weight loss, and the microscopic grease film on his signet ring, a film characteristic of high-grade synthetic setting wax used in clandestine stone swapping. "He's desperate," Malachi observed silently, "and he's handling unmounted stones behind closed doors." Malachi gently patted Sienna's hand, offering her a faint, reassuring smile that instantly communicated complete calm. "Eat your lunch while it's warm, Sienna," Malachi said softly, ignoring Julian's finger entirely. "You've been on your feet since 6 this morning." "Hey, I am talking to you," Julian snapped, infuriated by Malachi's utter refusal to cower. "Don't you dare turn your back on me." Julian reached out instinctively, grabbing Malachi's shoulder to yank him back around. The moment Julian's hand made contact with the grey fabric, Malachi moved. It was not a violent strike or a flashy display of martial force. It was a subtle, microscopic shift of leverage. Malachi simply stepped back half an inch, rotating his torso while raising his left elbow, just enough to intercept Julian's wrist. He caught Julian's thumb in a gentle, precise lock, applying a tiny fraction of pressure to the joint's pressure point. Julian froze instantly. A sharp, paralyzing jolt of pain shot up his forearm, pinning his shoulder in place and forcing him onto his tiptoes with a sharp gasp of shock. His face drained of color in less than a second. To anyone watching from the atrium floor below, it appeared as if Malachi had merely turned to steady the manager who had lost his balance. "It is unwise to lay hands on maintenance staff, Mr. Vance," Malachi whispered in a low, dry tone that carried an icy, lethal edge. "Occupational safety guidelines are quite strict about physical contact in the workplace." Malachi released the wrist. Julian stumbled backward 2 paces, clutching his hand to his chest, his breathing shallow and rapid. He stared at Malachi with wide, terrified eyes, a sudden, primitive instinct telling him that the large, Qian standing before him possessed a power far beyond anything a janitor should hold. Before Julian could find his voice to shout for security, the heavy double doors of the main atrium burst open below. A gust of cool afternoon air swept through the gallery as a contingent of 4 armed security officers in dark suits entered, escorting an armored courier carrying a heavy, titanium-reinforced velvet case. Walking beside the courier was an elderly, distinguished gentleman with a silver cane, Lord Harrington, one of Aurelia's most prominent board members and a world-renowned gemstone collector. Director Vance. Lord Harrington's voice boomed across the atrium, drawing the attention of every guest in the building. The centerpiece for tonight's auction has arrived. The ocean tier is officially in the house. Inside the titanium case lay a legendary 18-carat Type IB fancy deep blue diamond, a breathtaking, flawless stone valued at over $15 million. At the sight of the case, Julian quickly rubbed his wrist, smoothed down his jacket, and swallowed his panic, forcing a rehearsed, polished smile onto his face. "Excuse me," Julian spat quietly at Malachi, though his voice lacked its previous venom. "I have real business to attend to. Get back to your mop." Julian hurried down the mezzanine stairs to greet the VIPs. Up in the quiet laboratory, Malachi stood near the glass wall, watching the titanium case being unlocked. His eyes narrowed slightly as he observed the deep blue gem catching the light. From 50 feet away, without a microscope or a loupe, Malachi's sharp, innate vision caught a microscopic optical anomaly in the way the blue diamond refracted the light source. "The light isn't splitting cleanly at the culet," Malachi noted, his mind locking onto the detail instantly. "That isn't a natural stone. It's an ultra-high-pressure synthetic composite." He looked down at Julian, who was greedily taking custody of the velvet display box. The swap hasn't just been planned, Malachi realized, his face turning to iron. It's already begun. The high-security vault room situated beneath the main gallery, Auralia International, was a masterpiece of modern engineering. Reinforced with 6-inch tungsten steel walls, laser grid sensors, and a biometric atmospheric seal, it was designed to withstand a rocket-propelled grenade or a prolonged siege. Inside, bathed in the sterile white glare of LED strip lighting, stood the central pedestal housing the ocean tier. Lord Harrington had departed for the VIP lounge to attend a pre-auction champagne toast, leaving the final mounting process to Night Operations Director Julian Vance and Senior Vault Technician Carl. "I'll handle the final mounting and security casing for the blue diamond myself, Carl," Julian instructed smoothly, his voice tight with an unnatural, nervous edge. "Go up to the main floor and verify that the perimeter laser grid in the central rotunda has been recalibrated." The technician hesitated, looking at the open velvet-lined titanium case. "Mr. Vance, protocol dictates that 2 certified vault officers remain inside during stone mounting." Julian drew himself up, his eyes flashing with sudden, imperious anger. "Are you questioning my authority, Carl? Lord Harrington personally entrusted me with the presentation. The board meeting is in 20 minutes. Go check the rotunda grid now, or I'll see to it that your security clearance is revoked by morning." Carl swallowed hard, bowed his head, and stepped out of the vault. The heavy steel door slid shut with a soft, pneumatic hiss, locking automatically from the inside. The moment the lock clicked, Julian's polished demeanor vanished. A slick film of sweat broke out across his forehead. His hands shook violently as he reached into the inner lining of his bespoke suit jacket and pulled out a small velvet pouch. From the pouch, he extracted a stone that appeared virtually identical in size, cut, and color to the ocean tier and ultra-high-pressure chemical vapor deposition, CVD, synthetic composite. To the naked eye, to a standard diamond tester pen, and even under basic optical magnification, the synthetic duplicate was a masterpiece. It had been manufactured by a clandestine European laboratory at a cost of $500,000, a small investment compared to the $15 million the ocean tier would fetch on the black market. Julian picked up the genuine blue diamond with a pair of soft-tipped gemological tweezers. His heart hammered against his ribs as he swapped the stones, placing the synthetic duplicate stepped into the display mount and slipping the real $15 million gem into the velvet pouch in his pocket. "Perfect," Julian whispered, his voice trembling with manic relief as he smoothed his hair back. "Absolutely flawless." What Julian did not know was that 40 feet above him, in the electrical maintenance conduit overlooking the vault's ventilation shaft, Malachi Cross was watching every single movement. Malachi crouched silently in the narrow, shadow-draped air duct, wearing his grey maintenance jumpsuit and a pair of dark cotton gloves. He didn't need high-tech wiretaps or surveillance monitors. Through the reinforced optical glass of the ventilation hatch, Malachi's extraordinary, innate vision, the diamond eye, tracked the entire exchange in real time. He saw the subtle difference in mass as Julian's tweezers moved. He caught the microscopic variance in light dispersion, the way the real type-tip diamond absorbed ambient light into a soft, deep violet blue hue, while the synthetic duplicate reflected a slightly harsher, sharper electric blue due to artificial boron doping. Malachi's face remained a mask of dark, unyielding stone. "He thinks he's clever," Malachi thought quietly. "Swap the stone in the vault, display the synthetic, let the auction proceed, and then blame the security breach on the junior appraiser who logged the stone into the system." Malachi's dark eyes narrowed as he realized the full extent of Julian's trap. Because Sienna was the junior gemologist on duty assigned to verify the physical intake logs for the Imperial collection, her digital signature was embedded in the intake chain of custody. If the fake stone was discovered during or after the auction, Julian wouldn't take the fall. He would frame Sienna for swapping the gem during her preliminary review, ruining her life, destroying her career, and sending her to a federal penitentiary while he walked away with $15 million. A cold, lethal fury settled deep within Malachi's chest, not the explosive rage of a foolish man, but the precise, calculated focus of a master operative protecting his blood. Malachi silently backed out of the air duct, slipping down the maintenance ladder into the dark service hallway of the basement level, like a shadow returning to the night. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his private burner radio, switching to the encrypted channel connecting his headset to his daughter's workbench upstairs. "Sienna," Malachi spoke softly into his collar mic, his voice dropping to a calm, steady rumble. Up in the second-floor laboratory, Sienna was adjusting her binocular microscope. She tapped her earpiece softly. "Dad, where are you? The auction preview begins in 15 minutes, and Mr. Vance just sent down an urgent request for the intake log override." "Do not sign the digital intake override, Sienna," Malachi instructed firmly, his tone carrying an absolute, unshakable weight that made Sienna freeze in her seat. "Listen to me very carefully. Whatever documents or stone certificates Julian Vance brings to your desk in the next 10 minutes, do not validate them. Keep your hands off the velvet trays." Sienna's breath caught in her throat. She recognized that voice. It was the quiet, commander's tone her father rarely used unless lives were on the line. "Dad," Sienna whispered, looking around the empty laboratory, her criminology instincts instantly firing. "What did you see? Is there something wrong with the ocean tier?" "The stone in the vault is a synthetic duplicate," Malachi revealed quietly, his boots making zero sound as he glided down the basement corridor toward the main floor stairs. "Vance just executed the swap inside the vault. He's going to use your digital signature as his scapegoat." Sienna's eyes widened in horror. Her hand tightened over her digital stylus. "He's framing me?" "Not while I'm breathing," Malachi replied softly. "Stay in the lab. Keep your composure. Let him play his hand." "What are you going to do?" Sienna asked, her heart pounding against her ribs. Malachi stopped at the base of the grand marble staircase leading up to the main gallery, where the city's wealthiest collectors were beginning to gather in their tuxedos and evening gowns. He reached down, slowly unbuttoned his maintenance jumpsuit sleeves, and rolled them up neat and tight, revealing thick, muscular forearms scarred from decades of high-stakes covert operations. "I'm going to clean the glass," Malachi said softly. The grand atrium of Aurelia International had transformed into a theater of wealth and anticipation. Soft classical music drifted from a string quartet on the balcony, mingling with a low murmur of multi-millionaires, aristocrats, and high-profile jewelers sipping champagne. At the center of the rotunda, bathed in a tight column of halogen spotlight, sat the armored display pedestal housing the ocean tier. Julian Vance stood beside the pedestal, his chest puffed out, radiating the smug, practiced charm of a man who believed he had just pulled off the perfect crime. He smiled broadly, shaking hands with international buyers, his eyes darting occasionally toward the second-floor mezzanine lab where Sienna Cross was working. "A truly magnificent specimen, Mr. Vance," noted Arthur Pendleton, an elderly, sharp-eyed diamond broker from London, peering at the blue stone through the heavy bulletproof glass. "The color saturation is remarkably deep. I assume all GIA and internal laboratory certifications have been fully validated?" "Of course, Mr. Pendleton," Julian replied smoothly, his tone dripping with false reassurance. "The stone has passed every rigorous check our house demands. Our junior appraiser, Miss Cross, personally handled the final intake verification just an hour ago." Julian intentionally raised his voice, just enough to ensure the surrounding collectors heard the name Miss Cross. The foundation of his trap was being laid brick by brick. He checked his gold watch. It was time to close the noose. Julian excused himself from the crowd and marched briskly up the sweeping marble staircase toward the mezzanine laboratory. He carried a sleek electronic tablet displaying the final auction transfer protocol, a document that required Sienna's biometric thumbprint to officially release the stone into the auction pool, legally binding her to the condition of the gem currently on display. Inside the lab, Sienna sat perfectly still at her workbench. Her heart was hammering violently against her ribs, but years of watching her father's unshakable composure had taught her how to mask her panic. She took a slow, deep breath as the glass door slid open. "Miss Cross," Julian barked, stepping into the lab and slapping the tablet down onto her desk with a sharp smack. "The bidding preview is live. I need your final biometric authorization on the intake log, now." Sienna looked down at the glowing screen. The tablet demanded her thumbprint to confirm. The ocean tear mounted on the floor below was the exact, genuine stone she had evaluated earlier that afternoon. She remembered her father's deep, steady voice. "Do not sign the digital intake override." Sienna looked up, meeting Julian's impatient, arrogant gaze with cold, professional defiance. "I cannot authorize this transfer, Mr. Vance." Julian blinked, his face hardening instantly. "What did you say?" "I cannot sign the intake log," Sienna repeated evenly, pushing the tablet back toward him. "As I stated earlier, I did not complete the secondary refraction sweep on the stone. Furthermore, protocol dictates I must physically re-examine any gem after it has been moved from the vault to the display floor before signing the final release." A flash of genuine panic followed immediately by vicious anger ignited in Julian's eyes. If she didn't sign the log, the chain of custody would break, and the entire liability for the stone would fall squarely back onto his shoulders as the last person in the vault. "Listen to me, you arrogant little girl," Julian hissed, leaning over the desk, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "You are a junior employee. You do not dictate protocol to me. You will press your thumb on this scanner right now, or I will have security throw you out of this building, and I will personally ensure your name is blacklisted from every gemological society in the hemisphere." Are you threatening? I am giving you an order, Julian roared, slamming his fist onto the desk. Suddenly, a commotion erupted from the main floor below. The string quartet stopped playing abruptly. The polite murmur of the crowd shifted into a sharp, collective gasp of alarm. Julian spun around, looking through the glass wall of the lab down into the atrium. Standing directly beside the armored pedestal housing the ocean tier was Lord Harrington. The elderly collector was pressing his own antique, high-powered jeweler's loupe against the bulletproof glass, his face pale and contorted in horror. This is an outrage, Lord Harrington shouted, his voice echoing off the marble walls, silencing the entire room. This stone is a forgery. The atrium erupted into chaos. Security guards moved in quickly, forming a ring around the pedestal. Billionaires and brokers backed away, whispering furiously as panic swept through the gallery. Julian's face went chalk white. His breath hitched in his throat. Impossible, Julian thought, his mind racing. The synthetic is perfect. It passes the thermal pen test. It passes basic loop inspection. No one should be able to tell through 2 inches of bulletproof glass. But Julian didn't have time to calculate. His survival instinct kicked in. He had to execute his backup plan immediately, before Lord Harrington demanded a full internal audit. Julian turned back to Sienna, his eyes wide and wild with manic desperation. He pointed a trembling, accusatory finger directly at her face. "You!" Julian shouted at the top of his lungs, ensuring the security officers on the mezzanine heard him. "You swapped the stone. I knew you were acting suspiciously with the intake logs." Julian grabbed his radio, broadcasting on the open security channel. "All units. Lock down the building. The junior appraiser, Sienna Cross, has compromised the primary asset. Apprehend her immediately." 2 burly, armed security guards posted near the mezzanine immediately unclipped their radios and advanced toward the lab, their hands resting on their holstered tasers. Sienna stood up from her desk, her hands raised slightly, but she didn't run. She stood her ground, her chin held high, her eyes fixed on Julian with a look of absolute, piercing disgust. "You won't get away with this, Julian," she said softly. "I already have," Julian sneered, a malicious, triumphant smirk twisting his pale face. He turned to the advancing guards. "Cuff her. Take her to the holding room. Call the police." The lead guard reached into the lab, his heavy hand moving to grab Sienna's shoulder. He never made it. A massive, grey-clad arm shot out from the shadows of the hallway like a hydraulic piston. A broad, calloused hand clamped down on the guard's wrist with the crushing force of an industrial vice. The guard gasped, his knees instantly buckling under the agonizing pressure as he was effortlessly redirected, stumbling backward into the corridor. Standing in the doorway, his broad shoulders filling the frame, was Malachi Cross. He didn't have a weapon. He didn't have a badge. In one hand he held his simple microfiber cleaning cloth. But his dark eyes burned with a cold, terrifying authority, a lethal, unshakable presence that made the air in the room suddenly feel incredibly thin. "Take your hands off my daughter," Malachi said, his deep, resonant voice echoing through the quiet lab like the toll of an executioner's bell. The second security guard drew his taser, his hands trembling as he raised the yellow weapon toward the towering figure in the doorway. "Back off, old man. Step away from the suspect." Malachi didn't even look at the taser. He stepped forward, taking a single, deliberate stride that closed the 6-foot gap between them in a fraction of a second. Before the guard could pull the trigger, Malachi's left hand struck like a coiled serpent, catching the guard's wrist and driving his thumb into the radial nerve. The taser dropped harmlessly into Malachi's waiting right palm. With a fluid, hypnotic twist of his wrist, Malachi popped the battery pack out, tossed the empty frame onto the sofa, and shoved the guard back into the corridor. The entire sequence took less than 2 seconds. It was executed with a clinical, terrifying perfection that left both guards groaning on the floor, utterly neutralized without a single punch being thrown. Julian stumbled backward against Sienna's desk, his eyes wide with primitive horror. "Security! I need armed units to the mezzanine. Now!" He shrieked into his radio, his voice cracking violently. "The janitor has lost his mind." "Save your breath, Julian," Malachi said, his deep baritone cutting through Julian's panic like a razor. Malachi turned to Sienna, his dark eyes instantly softening into that familiar, infinite warmth. "Are you all right, sweetheart?" Sienna took a deep breath, her heart steadying as she stood beside her father. "I'm fine, Dad. They didn't touch me." "Good," Malachi said softly. "Then let's go finish this." Down in the atrium, the chaos had reached a fever pitch. Lord Harrington was pacing frantically in front of the armored pedestal, flanked by 4 armed museum guards and surrounded by dozens of nervous, high-profile collectors. "I demand the head of security this instant," Lord Harrington roared, shaking his silver cane at the glass case. "This stone is an insult to my intelligence. I've collected type-tib diamonds for 40 years. The refractive index is entirely wrong." Suddenly, the heavy glass doors of the mezzanine elevator opened, and Malachi Cross stepped out onto the marble floor of the atrium. He still wore his faded grey maintenance jumpsuit, its sleeves rolled up tight over his muscular forearms, a clean microfiber cloth tucked casually into his belt. Behind him walked Sienna, her head held high, followed closely by a pale, sweat-soaked Julian Vance, who was desperately trying to smooth his disheveled hair while pointing frantically at Malachi. "Guards, arrest that man!" Julian screamed, striding into the center of the rotunda, trying desperately to regain control of the room. He assaulted 2 security officers upstairs. He and his daughter are co-conspirators in an attempted theft of the Ocean Tier. 4 armed guards immediately raised their sidearms, stepping into a tactical perimeter around Malachi and Sienna. The crowd of billionaires and aristocratic buyers gasped, pulling back toward the mahogany pillars. "What is the meaning of this madness, Vance?" Lord Harrington demanded, his sharp eyes glaring at the night director. "Who are these people, and why aren't you explaining why there is a synthetic glass trinket sitting inside my pedestal?" "Lord Harrington, please, calm yourself," Julian pleaded, his voice trembling with manic desperation as he gestured accusingly at Sienna. "The stone in the case is a forgery, sir. We just discovered it." Junior appraiser Sienna Cross tampered with the intake logs during her preliminary review this afternoon. She swapped the real stone for a synthetic composite and was attempting to flee the building with her father. Sienna stepped forward, her eyes flashing with righteous anger. "That is a complete lie. I refuse to sign the digital transfer override. Because Mr. Vance tried to force me to validate a stone I was never allowed to inspect after it left the vault." "Silence," Julian barked, turning to the guards. "Cuff them both. Take them to the basement holding cell before they ruin this auction any further." "Hold your fire." The command was not shouted, carried no hysterical anger or high-pitched panic. It was a single, low rumble from Malachi Cross, a voice so resonant, so profoundly authoritative, that every guard in the room involuntarily froze, their fingers lingering on their triggers without pulling them. Malachi stepped past the circle of guards, walking with calm, unhurried strides directly toward the bulletproof pedestal housing the blue diamond. Julian's face went completely chalk white. Stay away from the display case, you old fool. You don't even know what a diamond looks like." Malachi didn't even glance at Julian. He stopped 18 inches from the heavy glass case, looking down at the deep blue stone resting on the velvet cushion. He didn't pull out a jeweler's loupe. He didn't reach for a digital diamond testing pen or a spectroscope. He simply folded his hands behind his back, his dark eyes narrowing slightly as he observed the stone under the halogen spotlight. Type C natural blue diamonds contain trace amounts of boron trapped within their carbon lattice. Malachi spoke softly, his voice echoing clearly off the high marble ceiling, captivating the entire room. When light passes through a genuine type tube, the internal refraction creates a soft, violet-tinted phosphorescence that lingers for 0.3 of a second after exposure to ultraviolet radiation. Malachi looked up, his gaze locking onto Lord Harrington. "This stone," Malachi continued smoothly, pointing a calm finger at the display, "was produced using chemical vapor deposition. The manufacturer doped the synthetic crystal with nickel impurities to mimic boron absorption. But because CVD synthesis grows in flat, parallel layers rather than a natural octahedral crystal habit, the light dispersion at the pavilion angle creates a 3-degree optical distortion along the girdle." Lord Harrington's mouth fell open. He raised his antique loupe, pressed it against the glass, and peered at the pavilion girdle with frantic intensity. 3 seconds passed in absolute pin-drop silence. Lord Harrington slowly lowered his lap, his hands shaking violently as he looked at Malachi in utter, speechless shock. He's right," Lord Harrington whispered, his voice trembling with awe. "The pavilion angle. It's distorted by exactly 3 degrees. You can't even see that under 10x magnification unless you know precisely where the crystal growth plane lies." Lord Harrington stared at the tall man in the grey jumpsuit. "Who on earth are you?" A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the grand atrium of Aurelia International. The high society collectors, international jewelers, and aristocratic buyers stared at Malachi Cross in stunned disbelief. Standing in the center of the rotunda in his dark grey maintenance jumpsuit, the tall, broad-shouldered man looked less like a janitor and more like an ancient judge presiding over a court of law. Julian Vance's face turned from pale white to a sickly, mottled grey. His eyes darted frantically toward the main exit doors, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He's making things up," Julian stammered, his voice cracking hysterically as he backed away from the pedestal. "He's just reading random gemological terms off a smartphone. Gods, why haven't you arrested him yet?" "Be quiet, Vance," Lord Harrington snapped, his voice sharp as a whip as he pointed his silver cane directly at the night director. "This man just identified a microscopic CVD growth plane flaw through 2 inches of reinforced glass without a single lens. I've been in the diamond trade for 40 years, and I've only met one person in the world who possessed visual acuity of that caliber." Lord Harrington took a step toward Malachi, his sharp eyes widening as he looked closely at the older man's face. The memories of a high-level federal security briefing 20 years ago suddenly rushed back to him. "Good God," Lord Harrington whispered, his breath catching in his throat. "You're Cross, Chief Director Malachi Cross, the man who designed the security protocols for the Smithsonian Collection and the Antwerp Vault." A wave of sharp, audible gasps swept through the crowd. The name Malachi Cross was legendary among elite collectors, a mythic figure who had spent a quarter of a century exposing the most sophisticated forgery rings and security breaches in global history. Sienna stood beside her father, her chin held high, a proud, subtle smile gracing her lips as she watched the entire room realize who her father truly was. Julian's knees buckled, His manicured hands shook uncontrollably. He knew the game was over. He knew that against Malachi Cross, no lie, no framed log, and no forged certificate would ever hold weight. Panicked, Julian reached into his inner suit jacket pocket not for a radio, but for the small, heavy velvet pouch containing the genuine $15 million ocean tier. "Get out of my way," Julian shrieked, shoving a startled junior guard aside as he lunged toward the private executive service stairwell at the rear of the rotunda. "Stop him," Lord Harrington shouted. The security guards hesitated, confused by the sudden chaos, but Malachi didn't hesitate. He didn't run. He didn't draw a weapon. Malachi simply reached down to his supply cart parked beside the pedestal, grabbed a small, heavy brass glass cleaning squeegee, and flicked his wrist with effortless, mathematical precision. The brass tool whistled through the air like a lethal pendulum, spinning across 40 feet of marble space. Shlek. The heavy handle of the squeegee struck Julian precisely behind his left kneecap. Julian let out a sharp yelp of agony as his leg gave out entirely. He pitched forward, crashing hard onto his stomach against the polished marble floor, his leather shoes sliding 3 feet before coming to a halt near the grand staircase. The velvet pouch flew from his trembling fingers, skidding across the floor and resting right at Malachi's steel-toed boots. The atrium fell dead quiet once more. Malachi walked slowly over to the fallen director, his boots making a steady, heavy thud-thud-thud against the marble. He bent down, picked up the velvet pouch, and gently loosened the drawstrings. With 2 calloused fingers, Malachi lifted the genuine ocean tear into the light of the central chandelier. The moment the real diamond met the light, the room gasped in collective awe. The stone didn't just reflect the light. It seemed to absorb it, radiating a deep, mesmerizing violet-blue glow that filled the surrounding space with an unmistakable, natural purity. There was no glare, no sharp, synthetic harshness, only the breathtaking, flawless perfection of a gem formed over 3 billion years deep within the Earth's mantle. Malachi looked down at Julian, who was groaning on the floor, clutching his knee in utter defeat. "You switched the stones inside the vault room at 4:12 p.m., Mr. Vance," Malachi said, his voice a low, thunderous rumble that echoed through every corner of the gallery. "You used a high-pressure CVD synthetic duplicate manufactured in Antwerp, expecting my daughter to sign the intake override so she would take the fall when the forgery was discovered." Malachi turned to the security team, his dark eyes burning with absolute, unquestionable authority. "Secure the suspect," Malachi ordered softly, "and call the federal authorities." The security guards didn't look at the fallen director, nor did they check their employee handbooks. They moved instantly, pinning Julian's arms behind his back and clicking heavy steel handcuffs around his wrists before hauling him to his feet. "You're a janitor," Julian wept, tears of pain and humiliation streaming down his pale face as he was dragged toward the security office. "You're just a janitor." Malachi didn't even look back at him. He turned to Sienna, gently handing her the genuine ocean tear. "Hold on to this, sweetheart," Malachi said with a warm, humble smile. "Your appraisal report was right all along." The pristine marble floor of the Aurelia International atrium was still bathed in the warm, golden glow of the morning sun as 3 blacked-out executive sedans, escorted by local police cruisers, pulled into the private circular driveway outside. Inside the gallery, the atmosphere of chaos had completely dissolved, replaced by a quiet, reverent hush. Julian Vance, his face streaked with tears and his designer suit thoroughly ruined, was led through the side exit in heavy steel wrist restraints by 2 federal agents. Behind him, forensic teams were busy securing Julian's office safe, where secondary documentation and wire transfer logs detailing his offshore black market accounts had already been uncovered. In the center of the rotunda, Lord Harrington stood beside Sienna Cross, staring in open admiration at the digital appraisal terminal. "Remarkable work, Miss Cross," Lord Harrington said, his voice ringing with genuine, unreserved praise as he reviewed Sienna's detailed spectral analysis of the ocean tier. "Your observation regarding the pavilion girdle's thermal tolerance saved this house from an absolute catastrophe. I will personally be nominating you for the senior chair of gemological evaluation at tonight's emergency board meeting." Sienna smiled politely, her poise dignified and completely unshakable. "Thank you, Lord Harrington, but accuracy is simply the standard I was taught to maintain." Before Lord Harrington could reply, the heavy brass entrance doors of the auction house glided open. Stepping into the atrium was an imposing, distinguished gentleman in his early 60s, wearing a tailored charcoal suit and holding an antique mahogany cane adorned with a crest of crossed magnifying loops. Walking half a pace behind him was the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Art and Gem Crime Division. The distinguished gentleman was Sir Reginald Ashford, chairman of the World Gemological Confederation, and the single most powerful figure in global precious stone authentication. Sir Reginald didn't pause to speak with the media gathered outside the police cordons. He didn't look at the displays of rubies or emeralds lining the gallery. His sharp, steel-grey eyes swept across the grand room, passing over the wealthy collectors and uniformed officers until they locked onto the tall, broad-shouldered man standing quietly near the maintenance cart in the corner. Malachi Cross had already rolled his jumpsuit sleeves back down to his wrists. He was holding a fresh microfiber cloth and an industrial spray bottle, calmly wiping down the glass of a nearby display pedestal as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. Sir Reginald marched straight across the polished marble floor toward Malachi. As Sir Reginald approached, he stopped 3 feet away, brought his polished mahogany cane to his left side, and bowed his head in a deep, formal gesture of profound respect, a gesture reserved exclusively for legends of the trade. "Master Cross," Sir Reginald spoke, his voice carrying a rich, crisp authority that echoed throughout the rotunda. "On behalf of the World Gemological Confederation and the International Treasury Safeguard Council, we offer you our deepest gratitude." The surrounding crowd of billionaires, appraisers, and federal agents went completely still, watching in awe as the chairman of the world's highest gemological authority bowed to a man in a grey maintenance uniform. "Sir Reginald," Malachi acknowledged softly, setting his spray bottle on his cart and offering a calm, courteous nod. "It's been a long time." "Too long, my old friend," Sir Reginald said, his face softening into a warm, admiring smile. "Word reached London 3 hours ago that a flawless CVD synthetic had breached Aurelia's vault. The council panicked. But the moment I heard that the diamond eye was on the floor, I told the Treasury Director to put his pen away. There isn't a counterfeiter on this earth who can pull the wool over your eyes." Sir Reginald reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out a sleek, velvet-lined mahogany box. He opened it to reveal a gleaming, gold-plated master loop engraved with the Roman numeral I and the official seal of the Global Federation of Gemologists. "The Confederation Board held an emergency vote at dawn," Sir Reginald announced, his voice echoing clearly across the gallery. "We are officially restoring your status as Chief Global Inspector Paramount, with full diplomatic immunity and absolute oversight over every premier auction house across 6 continents. He held the box out to Malachi. "The world needs your vision, Malachi. Name your terms, name your team. The entire International Council is waiting for your return." Standing beside her father, Sienna looked at the shimmering gold loop, her heart swelling with boundless, overwhelming pride for the quiet man who had raised her. Malachi looked down at the gold loop. For 25 years, that title and the heavy responsibility that came with it had defined his every waking hour. It had meant sleepless nights in foreign vaults, high-stakes forensic evaluations, and a life lived under the constant threat of international syndicates. He looked from the gold loop to his daughter's bright, beautiful smile. With a calm, deliberate gentleness, Malachi reached out and closed the lid of the mahogany box, softly pushing it back toward Sir Reginald. Sir Reginald Ashford stared at the closed mahogany box in his hands, his steel-grey eyes widening in quiet surprise. In all his decades presiding over the World Gemological Confederation, he had never seen anyone turn down the position of Chief Global Inspector Paramount alone, a man who had dedicated his life to the absolute mastery of the trade. "Malachi," Sir Reginald said softly, his voice laced with genuine wonder, "are you truly refusing the highest mantle our industry can bestow?" A gentle, unshakable serenity touched Malachi's face. He looked down at his broad, colored hands that had held raw diamonds worth fortunes, disarmed armed mercenaries, and calibrated the most delicate vault locks in existence, and then looked at Sienna. "My mantle has already been passed, Reginald," Malachi replied, his deep baritone smooth and resonant. "The world doesn't need an old man sweeping galleries with his eyes. It needs young, principled minds who refuse to compromise on the truth." Malachi gestured toward Sienna, who stood tall beside the display pedestal, holding the genuine $15 million ocean tier with absolute, steady confidence. "My daughter is the future of Aurelia," Malachi continued softly, "and my place is right here making sure the glass stays clear so her work can shine." Sir Reginald looked from Malachi to Sienna. Slowly, a profound, approving smile spread across the chairman's face. He snapped the mahogany box shut, tucked it into his pocket, and stepped over to Sienna. Taking her hand with aristocratic elegance, Sir Reginald bowed his head. "Then Aurelia International is in the most capable hands in the hemisphere, Miss Cross," Sir Reginald declared warmly. "Effective immediately, the Confederation officially endorses your appointment as Senior Chair of Gemological Evaluation. Any report bearing your signature will carry absolute, unquestioned authority across every exchange from London to Tokyo." Lord Harrington clapped his hands together in delight, and a warm wave of applause rippled through the remaining collectors, federal agents, and gallery staff in the atrium. Sienna flushed slightly with emotion, but her voice remained steady, clear, and proud. "Thank you, Sir Reginald. I will honor the standard." An hour later, as the federal forensics team wrapped up their investigation and the morning light fully flooded the grand atrium, the heavy glass doors of Aurelia International opened once more. Malachi stood near his maintenance cart in the quiet gallery. He had placed his microfiber cloth into his supply bin, wiped down his industrial spray bottle, and hung his brass key ring onto the cart's side hook. Sienna walked up beside him, having changed out of her lab coat into a sharp, professional blazer. She carried her leather briefcase in one hand, her dark eyes shining with quiet affection as she looked at her father. "So," Sienna began, her lips curving into a playful, teasing smirk as they stepped out onto the granite steps of the auction house together. "Master Malachi Cross, Chief Global Inspector Paramount, the Diamond Eye." Malachi let out a low, warm chuckle that echoed pleasantly in the crisp morning air. "It sounds a bit theatrical, doesn't it?" "A bit?" Sienna laughed, shaking her head as they walked side by side down the avenue toward their favorite corner diner. "Dad, Sir Reginald Ashford, the man who authenticates crown jewels, literally bowed to you in front of 20 billionaires." And all this time, you let me think you were just really obsessive about checking light bulbs and window smudges. Observation is observation, Sienna, Malachi said smoothly, his dark eyes twinkling with quiet humor. Whether you're looking for a microscopic fracture in an 18-karat blue diamond or checking if the kitchen window is locked at night, the principles are exactly the same. Sienna stopped on the sidewalk, turning to face her father. The playful teasing vanished from her expression, replaced by a deep, overwhelming warmth that brought a shimmer of tears to her eyes. "You gave up the highest position in the world today," she said softly, "just to stay near me." Malachi reached out, his large, warm hand gently cupping her shoulder with the same protective tenderness he had shown her since she was a little girl. "I didn't give up anything, sweetheart," Malachi said softly, looking down into her eyes with boundless pride. "I spent 25 years staring at the rarest gems on earth. None of them ever came close to the beauty of watching you become the woman you are today." Sienna smiled, stepping forward to wrap her arms tightly around her father's broad chest. Malachi hugged her back, holding her safe against the morning chill as the city around them woke up to the sun. "Now come on," Malachi added warmly, letting go and patting her shoulder. "Let's go get some breakfast. All this detective work has made me hungry, and I know a place where the coffee is hot and nobody asks to see a gemological certificate." Hand in hand, father and daughter walked down the sunlit avenue together, leaving behind the gilded world of high society vaults and deceptive shadows, stepping into a peaceful, brilliant future where their honor remained